There's always something that needs a little fixing on Far Point Farms.
God, I love being a mechanic. God, I love driving cars that are always breaking down. No, wait, I just like the first part. I like being a mechanic. Anyway, tonight we'll be replacing this very locked up caliper on this very 2005 Mitsubishi Outlander. Rust, the bane of all our existence, has taken its treacherous hold on the components of the brakes and suspension on this car. And little by little, I'm having to replace pretty much everything because that's pretty much what it's like living in an area that uses a ton of salt in the winter. This caliper is dragging pretty hard. Luckily, I caught it very, very early on, so the brake pads are okay. The rotors are ugly. I'll address that another day. I'm actually going to turn them at my other shop, and where I have a brake turning machine, I'll cut those and put them back on. But for now, I'm going to be removing the caliper, cleaning up the rust, and grinding the rust off of the old brake pads, cleaning up the hardware as best I can, replacing the caliper, and then bleeding it. If you want to follow along with me, well, you've come to the right place. If you want to know how to replace a caliper on any vehicle, this job is going to be nearly identical no matter what the make and model that you are talking about. As long as it has disc brakes, this job is going to be very much the same. So let's get started, and the first thing to do to get started is to remove the wheel. And to remove the wheel, I'm going to be using an air impact gun and a 21mm for this particular job, but for whatever job you're doing, it could be a 19, it could be a 17, it could be a 21, a 22, or if it's a Range Rover, I think like a 23. I mean, who knows? That's a weird car. Anyway, I'm going to pull this off. Now look, as I do this job, I'm using an automotive style lift, air guns, all that stuff. Don't get discouraged if you have none of that. As long as you have the socket sizes that I use in this video, you'll be fine. You're going to need about, let's see, I think it's 3 different size sockets and 1 wrench, and of course a bottle of brake fluid. So as long as you've got those things, hey, you're going to be golden. Let's get started. Once I get the tire loose, I'll go ahead and take it down and put it out of the way. And that'll expose our beautiful brake rotor and brake caliper. Now, here's a little pro tip for you. If you leave the keys in the car, you cycle the key on and off, leave the keys in it, well, then the steering lock is released. So I can actually move this wheel, and I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to rotate this thing by hand, turn the wheels that way. That gives me a little bit more room to work. And the next thing I'm going to remove here are these, which I believe are 17s. Well, let's find out. Most cars are either going to be 17s, 13s, 14s, or 12s. I think there's a couple Chryslers out there that are 11s. Why are they 11s? Because Chrysler, that's why. They are in fact 17s. I'll go ahead and remove these. Okay, so as you see right here, this style is a bolt that has the slide pin attached to it. It may be that it has a bolt and a slide pin that is separate. It doesn't matter. This still works the same way. In this case, I'm going to slide that back in temporarily so I can loosen up my top one. I am going to remove both of these. Again, I'm using a ratcheting wrench. You don't have to have a ratcheting wrench. You could use a ratchet with a socket, or you can use a regular wrench. Just because I have tools to make this job easier doesn't mean that this job can't be done with other tools. So I'll go ahead and remove those two. And then I'm going to pull my caliper here and pull it out and pull it up. This is going to be a little difficult because, as you saw before, it is seized. Here's a little trick. I'm going to use that same 17. I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to pry on that, and that's going to release it. So there it goes. I'll lay that up on top here, and I'll get a little pair of, well, not a pair. I'm going to get a bungee cord. And again, you don't have to have this, but it sure does help sometimes if you have these kind of tools. And I'm going to run that around the spring up here. And that's just going to allow that, let's see if I can get through there. There we go. There we go. I'm going to allow that to dangle that way. That way we don't put too much pressure onto that brake line, that brake hose right there. So we got that out of the way. I've got these, and these are, I mean, they are rusted in place, and that's probably where a lot of our problems coming from. And now I've got 2 more bolts behind here. Those, I believe, are 19s. Let's find out. There we go. 19s it is. And I've got, again, I'm using a swivel impact socket. Do you need a swivel impact socket to do this job? Absolutely not. You can do this with a pair of, you can use it with a 19 wrench. You can use it with a 19 ratchet and a socket. Either way. There we go. I've got those two out. I'll set those aside. I'm going to pull this off. And you can see it is stuck in the bracket. Look at that. Those are just, look at this. There we go. Here's our culprit on this vehicle. That is just rusted. And even though we've cleaned and lubricated that every time we've replaced brake pads, those are rusted in place. I can't hardly move them. Maybe get one. But if those aren't moving freely, well, they ain't moving at all. And you can see the rust built up on there. But thankfully, the brake pads themselves still have about 50%, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less. I am going to be reusing those because I'm poor. And, well, the cost of a caliper and caliper bracket was kind of high. Now, could I rebuild this? If it turns out that the caliper was compressible, right? If I could compress that, which I've already attempted and it is not, I could probably clean all this up. I could take a wire wheel brush and brush this all out and clean it up. But in my case, it needs both the bracket and the caliper. If you're going to buy a caliper, go ahead and get one that has a bracket with new clips and everything like that. You just save yourself a bunch of money. All right, once these two have been removed, and they have now, I'm going to take these over. I've got a wire brush wheel, put some safety glasses on. I'm going to clean these up real nice. And then I've got something called brake grease, which we're going to be using when we reassemble this fine beast. It is Extreme Brake something lubricant. I don't know who made this, Permatex, but you can get this anywhere. A lot of times you buy a set of brake pads, it comes with a little squirt pouch of it. So good stuff to have. This was, I think, 10 bucks, and it's probably at least 10 years old and probably will last the rest of my life. All right, so let's try that and I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, well, hopefully you can see, cleaned up those mating surfaces really well, got all the rust and dust and crud off of them. I'm going to go ahead and lube those up with that grease. And here's that grease right here. It's real fashionable stuff. It's purple. Purple's a good color, right? Go ahead and I'm just going to get that on the ends there. Now, there's a debate about this. Some people say that you put this grease on there and it actually attracts the salt and holds on to it. Other people say it protects it from becoming seized. I honestly don't know. I've certainly done brake jobs both ways, but I have the stuff here at the house. I'm going to go ahead and put it on there. That's it. Now it's time to actually take the caliper itself off and swap it out. And then we'll have to, of course, reassemble everything and bleed it. All right, so once we've got that taken care of, it's time to actually take this caliper off. And in order to do that, we're going to need to remove the brake line right here. That is that right there. That is that line, that hose that's coming up and go into this. This is where my fluid is. And I want to do that. That's going to be a 14 millimeter. I'm going to use this 1/4 inch, or actually it's called an impact driver, but you can buy these. It's actually really cool. You buy these driver bits that are 1/2 inch, 3/8, whatever, 1/4 inch bits, and that allows you to use your sockets on that. I do have a 14 millimeter impact. Now I'll go ahead and take this loose. When I do this, fluid's going to start coming out, so this is like a quick dance. You will lose some brake fluid. Brake fluid is nasty. It is, however, easily cleaned up with water. And we'll get the new one on there, reassemble everything, and that'll be that. That's it. Once our brake caliper is free, we'll just go ahead and drain this thing the rest of the way out and put that in. You're going to need to return that for your core charge. So and it's time to put the new one on. All right, before I go ahead and put the caliper back on, I did want to point this out. As some of you may or may not notice, yes, I have taken a pair of channel locks and I have pinched the brake line or the brake hose. That is not something you're supposed to do. Okay, a lot of mechanics will do this. I do this. I've never had a problem with this, but by the book, what is recommended from the manufacturer, that's a no-no. You're not supposed to smash those brake lines. It can weaken the hose itself. So just be aware that that's not by the book. That's just something I do. I don't recommend you do it, but keeps all the fluid from draining out, so it is what it is. Anyway, I've got my new caliper over here. Let me go grab it. We'll reinstall this thing, and it'll go back together really quickly. Now, before you put this thing back on, first thing you want to do is get that little green cap out of there. This could be any color. This is just to keep dust and debris from getting in there. Once that's out of there, that's great. Before you reinstall this, I can't tell you how many times I've had cars towed into the shop where somebody has replaced their own caliper, but they can't get it to bleed right. And that is because they're taking this caliper, which is made for the driver's side, and we can tell it's the driver's side because the bleeder valve here is up at the very top. And they're installing it on the passenger side, which will fit perfectly, except the bleeder valve is down here and the air all floats up to the top, so you won't be able to bleed it properly. So make sure when you get your caliper that it's for the right side. Once I've got it started by hand, I'll go ahead and tighten those down. Then I'm going to loosen up those slide pin bolts again because I have to install my brake pads. I'm reusing those old pads. This time I'm not going to remove both. I'm just going to remove the lower one. And I'm going to roll that up like so. Alright, once I've got the caliper back on, I've removed the lower pin here. I've got this on it. It's time to install my hardware. Luckily this kit was nice enough to came with new hardware. But this is why you save your old stuff just in case. Now sometimes these kits will come with more than one hardware kit because the caliper might fit more than one model. Just be sure that when you're installing it that everything fits in there nicely. And I got my brake pads here, which are already greased up. And I'm going to go ahead and reinstall those. They should fit in there nicely. And see how well they slide, unlike the other ones that were kind of stuck. Once everything's back in place, I'll reinstall my lower slide pin here. Actually, I'm going to put a little more grease on that. Check the tightness on the top. That's all good. And the last step is to reinstall that brake hose. Okay, your last step is to reinstall the brake hose. I've got a new bolt here. Looks like it's a different size. Instead of a 14, it looks like a 12. Got two new washers to go with it. One washer goes on the outside, one washer goes on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And then we can remove our clamp if you've used it. Remember, not supposed to do that. And that's it, we're ready to bleed it. So there are two ways to bleed these things, the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is with a friend. You get somebody up in the car to pump, which I will have my invisible partner here do that here in a second. The other way, which is a little more time consuming, is called gravity bleed. You could break the bleeder here loose, let it bleed until you get fluid out of it, pump up the brakes a bunch, and open it back up, let it bleed out until you get some air, that bubbles that come out until you have solid flow again, and do the same thing over and over again until you bleed it out. I've done it when I don't have a partner or somebody to help out. And of course, if you have a bleeding machine, that's a moot point. But for my purposes tonight, I'm going to get my partner here up in the car, and she'll help me out with that. All right, so for this last step, I have got my assistant up in the car, and I'm going to bleed these brakes. I'm going to be standing in a bad spot. It's going to squirt right at me, but that's okay. All for the internet, right? This is an 8mm, could be a 9, could be a 10, could be 11. I've seen them 7s, I've seen quarters, so this is kind of a random size, but 8 is usually what the Asians use on their vehicles, so that is what we got here. Gonna go ahead and, I've also added a little fluid to the reservoir just so we can not run out of fluid while we're doing this bleeding. Go ahead and pump it up.
Holding.
Pump it up.
Holding.
Pump it up.
Holding.
One more time.
Holding.
And that's usually it. So the next step is to go ahead and fire up the vehicle, pump the brakes a few times, see how well it feels. And if it's good, it's good. If not, we'll shut it off and bleed it. Usually once or twice more. Once or twice opening the screw, we'll get it out. Double check my level, get my tire back on, and we're out of here. Go ahead and fire it up. How's it feel? And that's it. I'll get my helper out of the car. We'll go ahead and put the tire back on, take it for a test drive. Okay, here it is. All installed, all bled. Put the tire back on here. And the next step is to go ahead, tighten that down, take it for a test drive, recheck the fluid level, take a quick look underneath for leaks. But that is it. Showed you how to replace your own caliper and bleed the brakes on your 2005 Mitsubishi Outlander, or pretty much any car, the front wheel or rear wheel that has disc brakes. It's all pretty much the same. There's going to be just a few socket sizes or wrench sizes that you're going to need to do this job. And as you can see, it didn't take anything special. There was no special skills involved. So I hope this video has helped you in determining whether you want to try to do your own brake work. The answer should be yes, but if it's not, please feel free to leave comments in the comment section below, and I'll help you try to figure out how to do the brakes on the car you have yourself. Until next time, I'm Eric, the owner of Farpoint Farms. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.